CONAB is maybe understated and the USDA is maybe overstated a little bit. And so they'll have to meet in the middle, I guess.
Hi again, everybody. Welcome back to the Comstock channel. I'm Marlin Bohling with you. It's always a pleasure to have you with us on these podcasts. And today we're going to take a look at conditions in South America. It's time for our weekly update with Matthew Kruse. He joins me now. He's the president of Comstock Investments. And we're going to take a look at how the planting season has been progressing here. And Matthew, good to have you with us. Anything noteworthy here before we start looking at some of our graphics?
Good morning, Marlin. I think just people are curious watching the planting pace and seeing how that unfolds. I think they're continuing to make good progress. The rainfall precipitation continues to be fairly widespread. They're seeing general soaking rains. There's just not a lot of threat issues there right now, and so that's just going to weigh heavily on the market. We saw some good news with Friday's USDA report, but the market kind of shrugged that off and looks like it went back to, trading the weather in Brazil here awfully quickly. So, I think they're here through early this week. They're probably close to 3/4 done overall in Brazil. In Mato Grosso and some of those center west states, they're in Paraná, they're, pretty much wrapping things up already. I was writing in our report in the Comstock report how on my farm they're making really good, not my farm, my family's farm, they're making really good progress in Minas Gerais. They're over halfway done, and so I sometimes if I'm lucky, I usually head down there early December and I can kind of catch the tail end of planting, and I kind of joke that I arrived just in time to kind of take some credit for it. Mostly to annoy my brother-in-laws, but it doesn't look like I'm going to make it quite in time this year. I think they might get done here late November, just a few days before I arrive.
Well, I'm looking at your graphic here for the planting progress, and this is interesting here. Explain what we're looking at here with the dotted green line on this chart.
So that's the 3-year average, and we've talked in the past how they started out kind of delayed, just with some little bit late start to the rainy season, but they've kicked it in gear here, and as the rainfall has picked up, so has the planting, and so they can move pretty quick then when they need to or want to. They're planting along at 20% a week here the last couple weeks, and now as we're over the hump and we're on the back end of planting, it starts to slow down a little bit, and so they're nearing 3/4 done, and it looks like they're going to end on time or even slightly ahead of average. So it's a kind of a dramatic shift in a short amount of time. So a lot of times they get the whole country done, pretty much by the first week of December, and it could be by December 1st here they'll pretty much have the planting wrapped up for the most part.
I like your dotted line going horizontally on that graph there, the black dotted line that represents where the bulk of the planting takes place. And we're almost at that point already. It's fascinating where there was so much concern in the market that helped push that soybean market higher here, what's it been, 3 weeks ago or so, on planting delay fears. And now we're actually past the average and we're coming toward the end of the planting window, the bulk of it anyway. So I would think that the weather premium is pretty much going to be gone for a while.
Yeah, it kind of flip-flopped here. We kind of alluded to that fact that when we saw the rains coming a few weeks ago, we said, they can plant fast when they need to. They have pretty good planting capacity, and so it was quite possible that they could still end on time, and that's exactly what's happened. The rainfall started to pick up. It's been pretty widespread. It's been consistent overall. I'm not saying it's perfect everywhere. There's always the haves and the have-nots, when it comes to the rainfall. But overall, that the whole northern tier region has been really doing really well, it looks like, and so they've caught up, quite a bit.
So looking at this map here that we have on the screen, this appears to be the European weather model, and it looks like they are forecasting rain for the core of the soybean belt in Brazil, but maybe not anything overly dramatic or anything, just kind of general scattered shower activity.
Yeah, it varies, right? There's a lot of regions that are only going to see an inch here in the next 10 days. That's pretty much what this is, a short-term forecast, and an inch when it's been dry and warm, an inch doesn't go very far, but there's a lot of the red areas there. Well, it'll see closer to 3 inches, and so. But the point is, it's fairly widespread on that northern tier. The parts there in the south, particularly in Paraná, state of Paraná, is not expected to get much of anything here in the next 10 days. But I think looking out beyond that, you see the rainfall kind of returning. So it might be a little bit concerning in Paraná, but it doesn't seem to be very long term, I guess. And so I don't know that it's going to have much of an impact. And they've had pretty good rain up until this point as well. And so it's pretty common. You're going to see some dry periods, dry spells in different areas throughout the season. But so far, so good, I guess, in Brazil.
Well, this would be a look about a month out now. And again, it looks like that's the European model. Now, you kind of have to take these with a grain of salt. But what do you read from this particular map looking at early to mid-December here?
Yes. So this is in a 30-day weather anomaly. So it's not showing like the volume of precipitation. It's showing generally what's a little bit above or below average. And so you kind of see the green and the blue hue there. That's where it's, through December 10th anyway, it's generally showing for most of the country in the growing regions above average rainfall, even over into Argentina and a lot of those areas. Now that little bit of red dot and some of that darker brown, that's in the northeast there. That's kind of showing slightly below. That doesn't mean it's not raining. It's just maybe raining less than kind of the historical average. And so, that could be a concern that we've kind of highlighted in the past, that northeast Mato Piba region in the northeast part of Brazil. But it's, that area is limited to about 10% of Brazil's overall production. And so I don't know that it's a huge concern yet.
Well, we've heard a lot of talk about soybean planting and how that has affected the markets. What about corn planting? I see where you have a graphic about corn planting in the U.S. compared to corn planting in Brazil. Has that changed a whole lot or not?
Well, you can kind of see over a long-term period, the U.S. corn planted area, has been fairly stagnant, at least, especially the last, 10 or 15 years. You compare that to Brazil, their corn area has grown, maybe not tremendously, but it's been a fairly steady growth. And it looks like for this year, they're, projecting slightly less acres, from 55 down to 52. And part of that's just reflective in, commodity prices, the same that we see in the United States. It dropped from, 94.6 to 90.7. And so, but yeah, it still kind of shows the trend to me that over the long term, if the trend were to continue, the U.S. is going to close that gap in production acres. And the corn is just kind of following on the coattails of the soybeans. As the soybean area expands, they plant more second crop corn. And, and so it might take another 20 years or more, but eventually, the Brazil's planted area of corn could catch up to the United States. But the U.S. still has a pretty big advantage in terms of productivity. Our soil and our seed genetics, I think, are still superior to what you see in Brazil. And so we're expected to have this national yield of 183 bushels per acre overall. And you compare that to Brazil, it's less than 100. And so, our productivity per acre is, nearly roughly twice what it is in Brazil. And, maybe they can make some progress there, but I think we can continue. That's where we kind of have the production edge with them is we're still producing more with less.
But how about demand? How does Brazil stack up against the United States when it comes to foreign buyers of U.S. corn? I see there's a graph here from Comstock. And boy, I tell you, there's some wild swings in that graph.
Yeah, it's kind of all over the place. I mean, the trend for both countries, I think, is up in the long term. But you go back to 2012, and obviously when we had the drought, there wasn't as much production, and so exports, fell off. But really, in the 2022 season when 22-23 season when Brazil actually overtook the United States for corn exports, just barely, not by much, but took the number one spot. There's a little bit shorter corn crop that year, and but now the U.S. is kind of reclaimed that top spot, and there's even talk that Argentina, if they have a good season here coming up, that they might even overtake Brazil and take second place, and Brazil would fall to third place. Now, while Brazil's production is increasing, they're also their internal domestic consumption is increasing as well. And so there's all these corn ethanol plants coming online, and that's consuming a lot more corn domestically. And so they have less that they can export. And so, this has been the big talk, is how strong, U.S. corn exports have been. They, continue to be running hot ahead of schedule. And so, they're competitive compared to Brazil right now. And I don't, this is supposed to be when Brazil's, taking over the global stage in terms of corn exports. And we're not seeing that this year. It's kind of a, out of the ordinary a little bit. So I don't know why that's going to change anytime soon.
You don't hear too much about Argentina's outlook in the national media. What is their current condition? I know they had a tough year last year. Are they looking pretty good so far?
Yeah, well, they had several years that were pretty tough, but so far, they got a long season to go yet. Their planting window is like 4 months or 5 months long. It seems like they'll start planting in late August, and they'll be planting clear till late January. So there's a long ways to go yet in Argentina, but they're projecting a tremendous rebound in yields. In the La Nina, they'll typically do hopefully get a little bit better rainfall this year down there. But one other thing that to comment on those exports is there's still a pretty wide gap between what the USDA has and what CONAB has, and I think for this 24 season, there's like 8 million metric tons difference in what they're projecting, like 44 for the USDA sees for Brazil corn exports, and CONAB sees 36 million metric tons. That's like 300 million bushels. And for next season, it's a long ways off yet. We haven't planted anything, but the export gap is like 600 million bushels. And so at some point those have to, I would think, got to get a little bit closer together. It's a pretty wide gap. I'm not saying they may never, meet 100%, but it's just kind of interesting how, I think the CONAB is maybe understated and the USDA is maybe overstated a little bit. And so they'll have to meet in the middle, I guess.
What about the economies of the U.S. and Brazil and Argentina? I should say the currency values. Argentina has a relatively new president. He really turned things around. They did have an economy that was kind of in the dumps. Brazil also has a relatively new president. We're going to have a new president in January. But how do they all kind of mesh together in competition with each other when it comes to affordability of our ag commodities?
Yeah, I mean, there's good things and bad things to each country and each situation. The U.S. dollar has shot up here with, since last week, since Trump was elected to be the next president. A strong dollar will, can typically make our exports more expensive. And then kind of the opposite is true there in Brazil. It maybe makes their a weaker currency in Brazil makes their exports a little bit more affordable then. But they also get more in their local currency when their currency weakens. And so there's good and bad things to both of it. Yeah, in Argentina, I'm not saying everything is back to normal there. I think that maybe it's stopped getting worse for the time being. Maybe that's a good way to put it. They were going through rapid inflation, where it was approaching 100% inflation a year. And so it was a major problem. And I think the new president is kind of, cutting government spending and some of those austerity measures that never seem to go away. And I think that's been helping a lot, but they've dug themselves into a hole, and it's going to take them a while to dig themselves out of that. But Brazil is kind of in the same situation where their government spending has been ramping up, and they're having a hard time making paying their bills and kind of justifying some of the government expenditures. And the U.S. debt is a problem too, right? We've talked about that U.S. debt has been exploding, and our interest cost on our government debt is seems to be heading towards $1 trillion a year, and with the higher interest rate costs, and I don't know that that's quite I don't know that we've felt the impact of that yet in our economy, and I don't know that most people realize it or the ramifications for it, but it's not a good thing. And I think eventually, that there'll be some negative ramifications for it. But for the time being, it seems like the rest of the world is giving us a pass on that, just because we are who we are, and we're the largest economy in the world. And but eventually, we're gonna need to cut costs, and otherwise, I don't see that ending well for us.
All right. Well, thanks for the insight into what's going on in South America. I always look forward to our weekly discussions about that, Matthew, and appreciate all that. And I hope you have a terrific week coming up.
All right. Thank you, Marlin.
Matthew Kruse, president of Comstock Investments, with us. That'll do it for this episode. And if you have some comments you'd like to share with everybody, make sure you post them down below, and we'll check them all out. For producer Brianne Hendrickson, I'm Marlin Bohling. We'll catch you next time right here on the Comstock channel. Futures trading involves risk. The risk of loss in trading futures and/or options is substantial, and each investor and/or trader must consider whether this is a suitable investment. Past performance is not indicative of future results.